I want to thank everybody for coming out. For those of you that read the Facebook event, this is both a rally to demand the cancellation of rents, the continuation of the moratorium of evictions, and the cancellation of utility shutoffs. It is also a campaign stop and a rally for the Party for Socialism and Liberation's presidential candidate, Gloria La Riva, who will be speaking later. She's in an interview right now. She's a very busy woman. Drove down from Chicago earlier today, and we're very excited to have her today. I'm really excited to hear her speak. And I want to talk really quick about why we are here, right? Like right here. Why we're not over there, why we're not across town. Because of course right behind us is the Champaign County Courthouse. And right behind me, in front of y'all, is the Sheriff's Office. And this Saturday, the Illinois moratorium on evictions ends. And so obviously, as people who are against rent cancellations, as people who are against evictions, we're here to demand first and foremost that the courthouse does not call for any evictions, not hear any eviction cases, so that people do not get evicted from their houses. And second of all, we demand that the sheriff, all the CPD, UPD, do not evict people, do not go to people's houses and use violence as a weapon to unhouse poor, Black, and Indigenous people. Because it's not separated, these fights that we're talking about. What I led with, what we're going to talk about later, it's not separated. When we talk about Black Lives Matter, we have to recognize, and police violence, we have to recognize that's the same police that evict people. It's the same police who, when you refuse to pay rent, are going to come with a big-ass hammer, knock down your door, and take you to court, and take you out of your house. So when we say ACAB, when we say, when we say abolish the police, defund the police, abolish the police, we mean cancel the rents. We mean no evictions. When we say cancel the rents, we mean no evictions. We mean abolish the police. It's not different. It's the same fight. And so for people who are attending one of their first rallies, or people who aren't, who are just getting into this from the rebellions and the uprisings that's been happening over the summer, I want you to think about that, how the ways that all these things are interconnected. Because it's easy to get, to have blinders on, like what Horace got, have blinders on, to be pigeonholed into just one struggle, to just one issue that doesn't address the reason why there's so many goddamn issues. Because, as my shirt implies, you can't have liberation without socialism, and you cannot have socialism without liberation. When we say that we want to be free from the threat of evictions, from the threat of utility shutoffs, from the threat of police violence. When we say that, and I hope we can all say, I can say that, I hope y'all can say that with me. When we say that, we have to recognize why we're even dealing with that in the first place and how we can actually be against that. Not just say it, but be against that. And the way that we can do that is to start fighting against and replacing the systems of oppression. I'm talking about capitalism, I'm talking about racism, I'm talking about sexism, I could go on. But if you can say, abolish the police, if you can say Black Lives Matter with your whole chest, then I need you to say, all Black Lives Matter, all trans Black Lives Matter, because it is not separated the fights against transphobia, the fights against homophobia, the fights against sexism, the fights against racism, the fights against capitalism. Like I said, it is not disconnected. And all of those are not disconnected for the fight for indigenous liberation, for Native American sovereignty. So, like I said earlier, I thank everyone for coming out. I want to pass the mic over now to Alan. Alan is an organizer with no airman shutoffs. I'll let Alan talk a little bit about some more local organization that's going on.
Thank you so much. Stated, my name is Alan Max Axelrod. I'm the campaign lead for the No Amarin Shutoffs campaign. We talk all the time about needing to get rid of money in politics, right? This is the 6th largest state in the country. A $0, all-volunteer, grassroots campaign spanning the state from Chicago to Carbondale, with the vast majority of organizations being in Central Illinois. We won 3 statewide moratoria on utility shutoffs. So do we need money in politics? Hell no. Sorry, I don't know if this is for public TV, I cursed.
It'll be edited
But I
out.
also want to talk about the struggle that continues, because there are fine print loopholes in that moratorium. First off, it is voluntary. It's means tested. Those two things are the biggest red flags besides the ones marching in the streets for human rights. Within 72 hours of this 6-month moratorium that we had won, Ameren, Illinois, a multi-billion-dollar corporation, decided that it was okay to shut off an Alton residents' power and electricity, gas, even though they were supposed to be protected by that moratorium. They followed the wording of the Illinois Commerce Commission's press release, and still this multi-billion-dollar corporation said it's voluntary, and they shut it off. So we have to talk about what we can do to protect human rights in our state. There are 217 home rule municipalities in this state. According to the Illinois Municipal League, each one of those municipalities can stop utility shutoffs entirely. That includes Urbana. I hope to see you there tonight to tell them that we need a moratorium on utility shutoffs. It's their legal counsel that even got the information. It's the entire city council that is sitting on that. The mayor last month or 2 months ago for Urbana talked to the governor and said, hey, we need a moratorium on utility shutoffs. Well, he has the power to enact a moratorium on utility shutoffs. It's 20 ILCS 3305/7 (12). I will not tattoo that on anybody. But the thing is, he's refusing to use that. He's refusing to use this power to protect Illinoisans. The person who said that he was going to lead in this state. We all know that's false. I voted for Gloria La Riva. I know which side of the table y'all are on and which side of the table they're on. We know that Mike Madigan's being prosecuted and investigated for corruption related to utilities. He's not the only one. The governor is prioritizing his legislative agenda over the basic human rights of the people he's supposed to represent. That is unforgivable. But again, there is 217 municipalities where we can pass resolutions and ordinances on utility shutoffs. We have 40 organizations, including the Party for Socialism and Liberation, including Black Students for Revolution, including CCR, including the Champaign-Urbana DSA, and including so many others that I do not have memorized.
That's all good.
But we need more. We need more people to get involved. If you're in an organization that was not listed, the Graduate Employees Organization is also one of those organizations. Please talk to me. Let's organize and project power and protect human rights in this state. Lastly, it's Indigenous Peoples Day. Let's talk about how Arizona decided to celebrate that. The Post reads, this morning on Indigenous Peoples Day, Arizona State Police and Border Patrol used tear gas and rubber bullets to attack the O'odham water protectors and allies who were protesting the construction of the border wall across Hiased O'odham territory. 8 adults were arrested, including Sherry Foytlin from the, I can't pronounce it, it's in French, camp, and Mama Jules of Mothers Against Meth Alliance. 3 Indigenous minors were also abducted by the state. I've got their bail fund thing here. I will be sharing it on social media. We have to honor Indigenous Peoples Day sincerely, not just by tipping over statues, but providing real, substantive reparations individually to the people who are continuing to be oppressed on the day that it's supposed to be for them. So, with that, I'll turn it over to the next speaker. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, Alan. Can we get another round of applause? Thank you, guys. All right. It's now my absolute honor to present the 2020 Party for Socialism and Liberation presidential candidate, Gloria La Riva. Cheers.
Thank you so much. What a great turnout here in Champaign-Urbana. I'm not surprised though, because people are getting active all over the country. in great and growing numbers. We're facing, who could have imagined the crisis that would be deepening, triple crisis, quadruple crisis this year, of the pandemic, of the economic collapse for working class and poor people, of the environmental destruction that has not slowed down because we're in the midst of a capitalist, overproduction frenzy. That's the cause of the economic crisis, of the environmental destruction. But if anything, I remember how people would tell me about last year that there's not that much activism, nothing's happening, it doesn't seem like people will ever change, it's apathy. And look what happened after this horrific assassination of George Floyd. The biggest uprising ever in the United States, of thousands of demonstrations, sustained protests, 100 days in Portland, dozens of days in other cities. I just came from Burlington, Vermont, where the students have marched every day for more than 70 days. I was in Nashville, Tennessee, where 14-year-old black girls formed a group called Teens for Equality, called the first demonstration that called 10,000 people turned out for them.
Oh, no.
And they were, when I was there, they were already marching for 70 days and occupying with other activists the state capitol grounds with tents, you know, peaceful protests. And so what did the governor do? Bill Lee? He passed a law that was not even reviewed by the public, signed it suddenly, that said anyone who continues to occupy the grounds, you know, the lawn of the Capitol, will face a felony and 6 years imprisonment and never have the right to vote again. Is that democracy? No way. That's repression. But that's capitalism. That's the capitalist democracy. So I'm really happy to see you here because all across this country, people are defying the state repression, defying and fighting police brutality, saying no more murders, although they continue at 3 per day. We're still fighting and we will keep fighting for justice for George Floyd, justice for Breonna Taylor, justice for all the victims. And don't think that just because there was no justice for people in the past, that we can't have justice for those who were murdered years ago. Oscar Grant, who knows Oscar Grant's case? In Oakland, California, New Year's Eve, he was celebrating with friends. He was in the BART station, which is the metro of Oakland, and the police came. He was doing nothing. They handcuffed him, put him on the ground, on his stomach. Cop is standing over him and shoots him in the back. In the back, handcuffed. Johannes Meserly, the murderer, got, I think he served a few months, second-degree murder. But now, the DA has agreed to review the case of another cop that was there that night for prosecution. That was years ago, but that's the result of this uprising, sisters and brothers. How many of you are students? Wow. How many of you wish you could be a student, but you can't afford it? How many of you are students and can't afford it? It's outrageous. We have a 10-point program that has gotten a great response in this country. I've been an activist for 40 years. I became an activist in college. I came to college naive, believing in the system, thinking, okay, I'm poor, I'm Mexican, we've been evicted 3 times in our lifetime, we, kicked out of our house 3 times. Typical situation for a Mexican-American family, but I thought capitalism is the best because that's how we're raised, right? And then I go to college because a young woman came into my school and said, apply at Brandeis University in Boston. And I did. And I got a scholarship for 4 years. And I thought, wow, my schooling, my hard work, it worked, it paid off, I did good. And when I got to school, the students said, we're going to tell you how you got to school. You're a goody two-shoes, but we're going to tell you how you got to school. They said, we took it over 4 years ago. The Black and Latino students in the big student strike across this country, dozens of schools were shut down for ethnic studies, against the Vietnam War, against racism, for affirmative action. They shut down Brandeis University and Columbia and San Francisco State. I was just talking to Danny Glover this morning, the actor, and he was a leader of that shutdown. San Francisco State University got shut down in 1968 for 5 months. Can you believe it? For an ethnic studies. It's the first school of ethnic studies that was ever established in the U.S. by the student struggle. And when I realized that I got to school because students sacrificed for me and risked their education, I became a lifelong fighter. And I said, I have to do the same for everybody else. And that's when I decided I had to become a socialist. Well, I quit school that year. Yeah, I did. But the greatest lesson was we need socialism. And I've been a socialist ever since. Ever since. And that's the only answer. You know, it's not reading about Cuba or Venezuela or other revolutions that's made people socialists. It's our own condition in the United States, right? It's living capitalism. They can tell us it's the greatest thing on earth. It's great for the capitalists. It's hell for us. It's hell for working people. It's getting cold, right? The winter's coming. How many people are going to be sleeping outside? How many people sleep outside now? The misery that people suffer every day, summer, winter, spring, fall. No access to a bathroom, especially in the pandemic. Having to plead for money every day just to eat a meal. Going hungry. Being ill outside. It's a crime of this system that we have maximum maybe 1 million people who are homeless and 18 to 20 million empty homes with cranes rising up new skyscrapers of condominiums. There's no shortage, there's an excess of housing. And that's the irony, that's the contradiction of capitalism. The more food is produced, the more hunger there is. The more housing is produced, the more homelessness there is. The more of the things that are produced, the more poverty there is. And what it takes is that we need to take the power. When you find out, okay, take this building. Who produced all those bricks? Think of all those bricks that were made. Who made them? The workers, right? They had to form them. But who mined the dirt? Who mined it? Who created the glass? Who created the steel frames?
Workers.
The workers. The workers do everything. I marvel at every building I ever see. I'm always marveling at the bridges. You know, all these structures, that takes a lot of skill, but it takes collective production. It takes collective labor of the workers together. No one person can do it, right? Not a handful of people can do it. That takes tens of thousands of workers in all that labor. And everything you wear, your shoes, they're probably produced abroad by other workers. If you have a cotton shirt and it's grown, harvested, woven, sewn, shipped, sold, it takes collective labor. That's our modern world we live in. And the working class is international. It's an internationally coordinated labor production because of the export of capital. The problem is it's owned privately. It's owned by a handful of people. Amazon, trillion dollar company now, What did they pay in taxes last year? Nothing. How is that possible? Because the capitalists control the politicians. It's their system. And they never, never have enough. They will keep driving down the taxes until they pay nothing. And we pay everything. How do we pay? We pay by cutbacks because there's not enough money to run everything. We pay by the housing shortages, the lack of social programs. We pay by parking tickets. How do you think the city runs? Parking tickets. How else do they run? How did the university run? Your tuition, your parking, right? Everything, housing, room and board. We pay through the nose for everything. But we could have the greatest society and every homeless person housed, and not housed in a shelter, not housed in a tent. Every homeless person should be given decent, good housing because it's there. It's there. How can you have people sleeping in doorways? How can you have people sleeping outside in the doorway of an empty building? That's our task, sisters and brothers. But I was talking about the movement, this great uprising. It's done more than any politician ever did, right? The politicians signed things into law when the people demanded. The civil rights movement, the struggle against apartheid, South, segregation, did it come because of Kennedy or Johnson having a good heart? No, they tried to stop the protests. It came because of the resistance of the black community, the black nation. It came by resistance of decades. Women's rights, how did we get them in the 70s? How did we get them? By overturning so many patriarchal, sexist notions about women. Look at the things from the 70s and you'll see how ridiculous it was when we were asking for equal rights. Do we have equal rights? No. Do we have the right to control our bodies? No. We had it for a while, and now you have this new judge being nominated. She may end up being the vote to take away Roe versus Wade. We have a lot of challenge in front of us. This election campaign is more than just you can vote. This election campaign of all our members and the people who support us is about raising the idea and the struggle for socialism. It's about raising the idea of stop the war on Black America, justice for George Floyd, stop the evictions, stop the foreclosures. It's about reparations for Black and Native communities. And we're serious about that. It's not a slogan, it's a reality. When you think about the end of slavery, when you think about, first of all the wealth that was created by enslaved labor, when you think about the fact that not only did they not get 40 acres and a mule in those days, but were put in prison by peonage labor, by the prisons that were formed. That's how Angola prison in Louisiana came about, and about Jim Crow, the Black Code laws. People like Woodrow Wilson. Do you know that Woodrow Wilson, when he was president, he was a Klansman, by the way. When Woodrow Wilson became president, in his terms, he made sure that all Black workers in Washington, D.C. were fired. Did you know that? They were eliminated from employment. That's what he did. And so when Social Security came about, Social Security was a great gain of workers. But agricultural and domestic labor was not included, and that was mostly Black workers. They didn't benefit at first from Social Security. And when the GI Bill came, for those who had fought in World War II, which was another great gain, Black soldiers did not benefit from it. It was mostly white workers. So the denial of equality, through discrimination, through deep racism, through white supremacy, this is why we say it can only really be addressed by fighting for all kinds of things like affirmative action. You know, it's been weakened, but affirmative action needs to be put back on the table. And reparations, including for Native people. Today is Indigenous Resistance Day. I'm glad we're here. And people have been asking me, a lot of young people said on the card, they go, it says here, treaties, honor treaties and sovereignty. What does that mean? Like, isn't that, some people said, isn't that a concession? Isn't that just part way? You have to ask the Native nations themselves. And they demand, they say, we are not a minority, we are nations with sovereignty, with treaties which have all been violated. They've all been violated. So they demand that the treaties be honored. We've got to keep that in mind. They demanded the treaties be honored. Case in point, the Fort Laramie Treaty of 1868. How many of you know about that treaty? The Fort Laramie Treaty of 1868 from South Dakota. First of all, it was all native land, to be sure. But in South Dakota in 1868, the government signed a treaty that said the western half of South Dakota is the Great Sioux Nation of 7 basic nations, Arapaho, Cheyenne, Lakota, and others. Lakota, Dakota, Nakota, and others. 6 years later, the U.S. discovered gold, and that treaty was overthrown. So today, Pine Ridge Reservation, which is one of those reservations, is the poorest county in the United States. The income on that land is $2,600 to $3,500 a year, not a month. Do you know how low? Think of that figure. $3,500 a year is the average income. But right next door to the reservation, which is stolen land from the Fort Laramie Treaty, is the Black Hills. Pahasap, as they call it. Black Hills. And that was stolen in 1874. It is a source of enormous profits for the mining corporations, Canadian and United States. And I was there in January on our tour, because we started early in the year. And we were there for Leonard Peltier, the great Native warrior, who we demand his freedom. 44 and a half years in prison. We demand Leonard Peltier's freedom because he was on that reservation in 1975. He's a victim of the U.S. wars against Native people. And he was there in protecting the people there who were under attack by the government, the FBI, and the corrupt administration of the reservation. But the Black Hills is a source of enormous profit, and it's their land. And in 1980, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that yes, it was stolen, and it belongs to the nation. But they said, they don't have to give it back. They said, you can get paid about $3 billion. That's a joke. And they said, to this day, the Black Hills are not for sale. That's what we mean about honoring treaties and respecting sovereignty. And there's a lot of other land in this country that has been stolen. We need to hear from the Native nations themselves, more than 560 in this country. So I'd like to end, but say that everywhere we have gone, every city we've gone, people's response has been when we hand them the palm card. Do you have palm cards? Does everybody have a palm card? Everybody has one? People are reading them. It's amazing. Bus drivers, sanitation workers. I rented a car this morning. The men behind the counter said, $20 an hour? Minimum wage? Damn, yes. Hazard pay? They said, we haven't had any hazard pay this whole time. And people are paying attention. Why? Because they need it, right? Before they might have thought, I'm okay. Nobody's okay today, right? You're all going to school. Are you virtual? You're virtual? Has your tuition been reduced? God, I'll tell you, just like affirmative action struggle for ethnic studies in the 60s, the national struggle of students, I think it's high time for students to take on a national fight. You got the social media. That's what I dream of. That's what I dream of. It's national. The students are being screwed. You have the only debt in the country that you can't declare bankruptcy on. The banks decided this is a gold mine for us. Talk about gold mining. They realize that students want a future. And you're told your future is through college. And the more expensive the school, the better, right? That's what some people think. No. I always say start a community college. It'll be cheaper later. But anyway, that's a side issue. The students have the power. You literally have the power. I'm not calling for that now, that's up to y'all. But someday, the students will reach across the whole country and have a list of demands. Cancel student debt. Make tuition free. Cut the administration's pay. My God, they make so much money.
Yeah.
The University of Michigan, a few years ago when they hired the new football coach, they gave him $48 million. That's outrageous. Anyway, education should be free. Can I ask, raise your hand, a student. Okay, what are you studying? Political science. What do you hope to do? Not sure, okay. Who plans to work for a private company? What do you plan to do? HR? Okay, human resources? Okay, human resources. So when he's done with his education, he'll go to a company and say, hello, I'm here to make you a profit. And you didn't have to pay a penny for my training to make you a profit. That is outrageous. People all over the world have free education. So anyway, we'll stop. We've got to fight also the U.S. military abroad. We are internationalists. If you're a socialist, if you're a humanitarian, you have to be against every U.S. war, sanction, occupation. There's no excuse for a U.S. action abroad because the role of the military is to protect profits, to maximize profits, to take over other people, to take over countries that don't agree with U.S. policy, to take over countries that have had revolution. They're an example for us, like Cuba, Venezuela, like Vietnam, like China, like Iran. Iran is under severe sanctions because it's a bulwark against U.S. aims of total domination in the Middle East. And Cuba today, which is providing tens of thousands of doctors all over the world to protect people against COVID, that went to Africa, Western Africa, to cure people of Ebola, to help them survive, that had 700 doctors in Haiti before that earthquake, before the earthquake. And then when it happened, they sent more doctors. Today, there is an appeal, a nomination of the Cuban doctors to receive the Nobel Prize for Peace. Because I was in New Orleans 6 days after Katrina. We saw dead bodies in the street. We saw the terror for people. More than 2,000, and a lot of people never accounted for. Never accounted for, in an urban center. And I was in New Orleans, and I got a phone call from Cuba, because I have a lot of friends there. And they said, Gloria, we're at the convention center. There are 1,100 doctors here with 2 backpacks each, 30 pounds of medicine each, 1,100 doctors, 5 emergency hospitals. And they said, We can be in New Orleans in 5 hours if George Bush gives us permission. 6 days before, at the point of the hurricane, Fidel contacted the US government and said, I'm doing this quietly. This is a quiet offer. We will not make news about it, but in 5 hours we can have those doctors there, including psychiatrists, to help people through their turmoil. And after 6 days, when they refused, Fidel decided we have to make this public so that hopefully the people of the US will demand that the doctors be allowed. Well, most people didn't know because the US media didn't let us know. But as a result of that situation, Cuba created the Henry Reeve Internationalist Medical Brigade. And these are the doctors that go all over the world to help people, sacrificing their own lives, risking their own lives to help people in emergencies. Who is Henry Reeve? Has anybody ever heard of that? He was an American. He was a young teenager who fought in the Union Army during the Civil War. And when Cuba's first independence war broke out in 1868, same year as the Fort Laramie Treaty, he went to Cuba immediately. He took a boat, went to Cuba, and joined the rebel army, the Independence Army. He was so bold and brave that he became a brigadier general. And he died in battle in Cuba. That's Cuba's solidarity. They organized this brigade and they named it after an American. So anyway, I am going to end, but we have to be very, very alert. The U.S. is blockading Cuba severely. They're sanctioning very severely Venezuela and blaming them for the crisis. It's not them, it's the U.S. government. But it could very well be that the U.S. may step up new aggression against Venezuela. Palestine, we say, not only, we're not for returning the embassy, the U.S. embassy from Jerusalem to Tel Aviv. We're for shutting down the U.S. embassy. We're for cutting off all aid to Israel, because that's what's keeping this apartheid regime alive. The minute the money gets cut off, that racist, fascist government will collapse in a minute, and the Palestinian people can have their self-determination. So that is it, sisters and brothers. I see you're all shivering. Can we do this? In the next 2.5 weeks that remain, can everybody help us by taking cards, telling store owners, the little shops, telling your neighbors, your friends, call your friends and say vote. Vote socialist this year. It's a real meaningful vote. It's a vote to say we're fed up. We are fed up with the system. We're fed up with people not knowing where they're going to eat next, how they're going to eat, how they're going to pay their rent, when are they going to get a job, when are they going to get laid off. There's so much uncertainty, and it's not necessary. There's no reason for it. We created everything. We should run everything. Run everything.
Thanks, Gloria. Gloria La Riva will be on the ballot in Illinois on November 3rd. I know this because I busted my ass over the summer to get the signatures. Just saying.
No, I just voted for you.
If you are registered in Illinois, please consider voting for Gloria La Riva. Talk to any of us in the red shirts. Talk to Gloria about it. If you're not a voter in Illinois, there's a pretty good chance she's on your ballot too. Come talk to us. We'll figure it out for you. All right? Now, like Gloria said, we have some cards up here. You can take them now, take them later. I want to invite our very last speaker, Haki, to come give a few words, and then we're going to get going.
How's everybody doing today? I'm going to keep it quick. I have a meeting to go to. But usually when I like to start, sometimes I like to say, give you words of peace. I usually say it in the Arabic language, Assalamu alaikum. A lot of times I say that as well to scare the Islamophobes, the whiteness. I like scaring whiteness. But I was reading an article and it said that 2,000 Americans could die on average every day in the month of December alone due to the harsh winter that is upon us. And I'm not talking about just white snow. I'm talking about whiteness in its most evil, in its most sickening state, by the Proud Boys, by the Boogaloo Boys, by 45 that sits in the White House. But we see and demand the cancellation of rents because we see the contradictions, how they build apartments here in Champaign alone for college students, and most of them sit empty. But let's look even beyond just an apartment. Let's look at the empty buildings because of coronavirus, the empty governmental buildings because of coronavirus, the schools that sit empty because of coronavirus, that sat empty even before the pandemic. Now, more than ever, is the call to end rents, cancel all rents, cancel all mortgages, but ensure public housing, proper public housing, proper public housing. I saw a photo the other day, and it was basically a family living in a household. The household didn't look the best, as you would say, quote unquote. And someone tried to say, this is cute, but this is socialism, this is what you want. And then I think next to it was a picture of an abandoned building. Somebody said, that's Detroit. And then the simple fact that the people were even able to live in a house, to have a kitchen, to be able to live in security. What does that mean? Why can't we have people just living in spaces? But the fact that they have beautiful spaces means that people can have luxuries. They try to deny the simple luxuries, but they build it. New York, they're building skyscrapers that look ugly. The architecture is not great. But then they try to talk about socialism architecture, but people are living. People have somewhere to live. People have somewhere to put their head at night. The security. But not only is housing necessary for security, but the abolishment of the police is also essential for the security of our people, the security of black and brown people, the security of LGBTQ plus individuals, the homeless. I'm gonna finish off with the homeless. And just some of the work that's been going on in Champaign regarding food and giving food to people. I'm the senior project manager of Naturopath Nutrition Incorporated, community health organization. I've been working with it since my freshman year of high school. My mother created the organization because she said, I'm going to tailor it to some health and wellness. I originally came to college on mechanical engineering to be like my father. But we all know U of I's engineering is hard as hell. If you're in it, stick with it. I couldn't do it. However, I knew that the journey was not over because it was setting up for this moment right here, when food insecurity is at its highest. They just had something on the news talking about before coronavirus it was 1 in 8 families. Now it's 1 in 5 in Central Illinois alone. But as Gloria said, the students that are here, there are a couple things that we can do to ensure that the university is forced to give up some of that food that they waste. The 100,000 pounds of food that they waste. The overproduction, but not giving it to people. There are only 141 documented homeless people in Champaign. Why can't they have a center that operates breakfast, lunch, dinner, and even late night, like PAR, for 141 people? The contradictions are astounding. We must fight those contradictions. We must fight for those who don't have the voice, who don't have the voice to speak up, who don't have the courage to speak up. And we understand that that is not an assault or a critique on them, because we know the dangers of when you speak up. We know the dangers of when you fight back. We know the dangers. But because we know the dangers, and because we've been out here all summer, we've been out here for 6 months straight in Champaign, we say to hell with the danger. We say to hell to the back to blue. We say to hell to the capitalism that seeks to expropriate the land from the Native American, from the indigenous people, that seeks to exploit the bodies of black and brown people, that seeks to push more people into the abyss of homelessness from evictions. We already have a problem. Why add more to the problem? This is what they're planning in my book, in my idea, and I'll leave with this. This is how it's all connected. Climate change. They said by 2050 or 2070, the article I was reading, that one of the few habitable places left in North America will be concentrated in the Midwest. The South will be too hot, too dry. The West will be too on fire. And it's crazy because we're already there. They're gentrifying the hell out of Chicago. They're gentrifying the hell out of Champaign-Urbana. And it's crazy because the revolution started in Minneapolis, and I know they got a twin sister city thing going on. And I think Champaign-Urbana is trying to do the same thing because they know that when shit hits the fan, when climate change hits the fan even worse than what it is now, they gotta house the privileged. They have to house white folks. They have to house the black bourgeoisie. They have to house those with capital. That's why they're building up so much and not letting people in. But the problem is that you're spending all of this money on building housing, apartments, going through more economic crashes because it's not a sustainable system. Instead of investing to house people, invest in sustainable energy so we wouldn't even have to have the problem of the mass migrations of people that will come because Miami is going to be underwater. New Orleans already been underwater. We know that's majority black. The cities, the people, and just think about those who are not in the United States, who are not here, who are closer to the equator, the islands, in the Caribbean, people in the global south that have been dealing with climate change at its highest, dealing with poverty at its highest, dealing with a pandemic plus the pandemic of HIV and AIDS, the pandemic, the epidemic of Ebola, those diseases that go unheard sometimes because it doesn't affect us. But I leave with this message because I have a meeting to go to regarding the Fifth and Hill community. So yeah, there are some diseases across the board that we may not know. But there's stuff right north of University Avenue. I'm speaking to the students. Right north of Campus Circle is a black community, black and brown community called the Fifth and Hill community, or you can call it Douglas Park. It's been dealing with environmental racism for this is going into the fight for 13 years. Ameren. Shout out to no Ameren shutoffs. But Ameren had a plant in the Fifth and Hill right at that intersection. They tore it down, did half-ass remediation, and now there are stories where if you go into the basements of houses, there's a mist. It's not water from condensation, it is the benzene. It's the toxic chemicals that flow within the groundwater, causing rare cancers that have actually killed people in this community. They told the UIPD has said something about numerous carjackings. It's been kind of crazy around campus. But that same Fifth and Hill community, the same communities near Bloomington Road, when you trying to go up Prospect to go to Walmart, to go to all those big box stores. A man named Chris was killed over there and we were on the scene 20 minutes before the crime scene investigation unit came up. And they asked why we say defund the police. Where can that money go to? Stopping the rent. Where can that money go to? Feeding people. The Fifth and Hill community, they had a shooting the other day. They've had shootings, it seems, once every 2 weeks or once every week. Jazz McCobb, she was killed. Beautiful black woman killed in the drive-by, and she was not involved in that shooting at all. 2-3 blocks north of University Avenue, and the university only tells you if something happens to white students or students with privilege, but it never tells you about the community that they bring you to, that you walk aimlessly, you party aimlessly in the middle of a pandemic. They don't tell you about the community they're bringing you to help gentrify it. This is what you do. You use your privilege. You use your power. You use your voice. They gotta listen to you at one point or another, because you're up $7,000, $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 for the money. So if capitalism runs on money and the money is in the pockets of us going to them, it's time that we break this relationship up. It's time to take back power. It's time to put pressure on Chancellor Jones. It's time to put pressure on Tim Killeen, not just for the students to get their money back, but to ensure that the building service workers get hazard pay. Let me take that back, because I read the card and they asking for double hazard pay, so I'm gonna do you one better and say triple hazard pay. I want them to all have housing. I want them to all have health care. I want them to be able to be the first ones to reap the benefits of everything that the university pushes out. You can do it. We can do it. We are doing it. We've been doing it. Sometimes the university's gonna wait till some of us graduate. They've done that. They've said it multiple times in our faces. But I believe simply because there are students out here today, there have been students that have been coming out recently through all the demonstrations. I'm more than hopeful that regardless of what students leave, of what when so-called leaders leave, when intellectuals or academics leave, we need to ensure that you all are politically educated to follow up behind us And it is imperative that you all continue to politically educate yourselves so that you can fight for those that will come after you. Cancel rents, public housing, and police brutality. In the carceral state, ending patriarchy, racism, misogyny. It's all one fight. We must fight. And come November 3rd, I say vote. I won't tell you who to vote for, but I will tell you that a protest vote works because this is the last election cycle that we tell the Democratic Party, never again. Thank you.
Thank you everyone for coming out. Thank you to all the speakers.